Greetings, fellow space travelers. Please forgive me. I got sick almost immediately after I got back from San Diego, and my voice is shot, but there was no frelling way I was letting this topic get past me, so I hope you'll all cope. My favorite sci-fi series, Sci-Fi franchise. A month ago, this would have been a much easier question, but there were some of the things they did, or more specifically didn't do, in the new Star Wars movie that really pissed me off, primarily leaving a lot of things out. I mean, there was a 30-year gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and we're given almost none of it in the opening crawl or in dialogue, certainly not in any detail. Some of the major characters' names are barely said in passing. We're given precious little about the current political climate, and thus why Leia is leading some resistance or other instead of being part of a new republic. Certain things happen to certain planets, but we're not told which planets, yada yada yada. Way too much is only implied rather than said, and that really kind of pissed me off. Until the new movie, nothing in Star Wars was left unsaid unless it was a deliberate secret or was completely unimportant, which does not describe the storytelling in The Force Awakens. So, as much as Star Wars is probably still my favorite sci-fi franchise, there's a sour taste left in my mouth now. But see, I spent most of my childhood in the 1980s, from 4 to 14 mostly, with just a 16-day margin at the end of December. And in the 80s, we had some pretty black or white stories where good guys were good guys, bad guys were bad guys. Nobody had to have a tortured past, or at least none of the good guys did anyway. Often following the hero's journey as described by Joseph Campbell, it was pure optimistic escapism, and I loved that. Oh, sure, there were exceptions, certainly. Blade Runner comes rather quickly to mind. But that was a large part of what shaped my taste, that optimistic escapist storytelling model, which is why so much of today's entertainment media doesn't really appeal to me very much. Now, there's this half-true, half-false notion that you either have to like Star Wars or Star Trek, but not both. And believe me, I've seen those arguments take place, and I've been in them once or twice myself. But I actually do like some Star Trek. I really enjoy Voyager and Enterprise, and Next Generation isn't bad either. But if you look at a lot of my other favorite sci-fi movies or franchises, you'll notice something. What do Star Wars, Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, The Last Starfighter, Farscape, and Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin all have in common? Small, high-speed attack fighters. I love space dogfighting, fighter planes in space, Top Gun among the stars. In fact, here's an animation that I made a few years ago called Ray Gun Rebecca. Purest space opera and almost nothing but space fighter combat. My favorite Star Wars character is Wedge Antilles, leader of Rogue Squadron. Wedge is one badass fighter pilot. Go look him up on Wikipedia and you'll see what I mean. And these fighter ships are noticeably absent from the Star Trek universe. I don't think they've ever even encountered an alien species whose fleets followed that model. To use a naval analogy, all Trek ships seem to be submarines, never aircraft carriers. And that's why Trek will always lose to Star Wars in my world. It's also why Doctor Who isn't making my list. Besides, what little Whovian fandom I have is pretty much limited to Baker through McCoy. I haven't watched any since. That's not a commentary on the show, mind you. I just haven't felt the need to hook my TV up for anything other than playing Dance Dance Revolution in a very long time. You'll also notice that 2 Star Trek series were left off of my earlier list. I won't watch the original series because Shatner is evil. Didn't mind the reboot movie, though. It's not Kirk, it's Shatner. And I rather hated Deep Space Nine. I point you back to what I said before about optimism. Along about the 90s or so, when Generation X was a thing, everything started getting depressing. And Deep Space Nine was no exception. Absolutely everybody on that show, with maybe one exception, was either a total sad sack or a complete asshole. There were no likable characters on the show at all, except Dax, upon whom I had a bit of a crush. It was the same thing with Space Above and Beyond. That show was a complete downer, too. And that's the thing. These shows are supposed to entertain me, supposed to lift my spirits. Remember, I'm a child of the 80s. I wanted optimistic escapism, something that would give me a break from and ease real-world tension. And if there's nobody on a show with whom I'd want to hang out for an hour a week, why would I watch it? So as much as I might have enjoyed Space Above and Beyond, because it had attack fighters like Star Wars, and as much as I might have enjoyed Deep Space Nine even without them, both shows were just too damn depressing. And while we're on the subject, so was that god-awful reboot of Battlestar Galactica and The Walking Dead. These are all shows I could have liked if they were just a bit more lighthearted. This is why Babylon 5 and Firefly make my list of shows I liked. Because even when situations got dire, the characters were still worth hanging out with for that hour. I haven't really touched on stories, on plot lines yet. Because Deland and Cole is right. Babylon 5's story is pretty amazing. Yeah, the first season is a bit ham-fisted, and yeah, they rushed to finish it in season 4 because they were told they were being cancelled, and then they were picked back up again for season 5 when the story had already been wrapped up, making season 5 mostly just filler. And it seemed like it was after Babylon 5 that TV shows started having continuing story arcs almost as a rule, rather than each episode always being a standalone adventure with no connection to the others. And in some cases that really worked. But the truth is that if a series goes on for long enough, I care a lot more about the characters, about the setting, about the mood, because a single bad episode won't ruin the whole thing. So all of that more or less sounds out my criteria for how I judge a sci-fi franchise. These are not hard and fast rules, of course. There are plenty of shows and movies I like that don't fit this model at all. Aliens, Predator, The Terminator, The Abyss, RoboCop, Tron, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. These all come immediately to mind. And I will admit to a certain weakness for post-apocalypse Road Warrior-style movies. Hell, I'm one of the only people I know who actually enjoyed Waterworld, or has even heard of Solar Babies. And though I'm not sure you can actually call it cyberpunk, I'll admit I like Max Headroom. The 80s knew how to keep a dark setting from being a wallowing in sadness or anger setting. But we're discussing my ultimate favorite here, and none of these make the grade. Like I said, if you'd asked me a month ago, the answer would have been easy. I was raised on Star Wars. But I find myself becoming a bit of a saga purist. Episodes 1 through 6, they've all kind of become all I like anymore. Yes, you heard me. The prequels, too. They're not as bad as everybody says. If you can overlook Jar Jar and cut Anakin a little bit of slack, I mean, they're not the only parts of the movies. The expanded universe just, doesn't do it for me. And that kind of colors my feelings about the series. Is Star Wars still my favorite? I suppose so, but whichever one takes second place, probably Babylon 5, has just gotten a bit closer to tying for first, if not taking the lead. And believe me, as a sci-fi geek, that causes me a smidge of sadness. A little bit of my childhood is slipping through my fingers. Oh, and to those of you who don't consider Star Wars to be sci-fi, genre names are just names and not meant to be taken as literal descriptions. If they were, then just about every work of fiction would fit under the fantasy umbrella, since surely every writer fantasized their works before penning them. And every science fiction series would take place in a lab, but they don't, and they don't have to. Look up the sci-fi subgenre known as space opera. You'll find Star Wars featured rather prominently. It was conceived by George Lucas as a tribute to the genre. Next up, Sketchy White Dude. Until next time, may the Force be with you.
Droids don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when their videos aren't rated. Bionic dances are known to do that.